Water. Can we afford to live without it?
It's time for U.S. World Report. Here's Tom Osborne.
These are the stories making headlines this week. President Donald Trump announced Wednesday he has revoked former CIA Director John Brennan's security clearance, marking an unprecedented use of the president's authority over the classification system to strike back at one of his prominent critics. Brennan is the first former national security official to see his clearance revoked since the White House announced last month that Trump was considering taking that action against several of his most vocal critics in the national security world. Hundreds of U.S. newspapers on Thursday launched a coordinated defense of press freedom and a rebuke of President Trump for denouncing some media organizations as enemies of the American people. Qatar pledged $15 billion in investment to Turkey, supporting a rise in the Turkish lira. The United States on Wednesday ruled out removing steel tariffs that have contributed to a currency crisis in Turkey, even if Ankara frees a U.S. pastor it is holding. Aretha Franklin, the self-taught piano prodigy, vocalist, and songwriter who first conquered the charts in the late 60s and never relinquished her throne, died Thursday morning of advanced pancreatic cancer. Rancher Dan Allen Hughes has run into a wall of opposition from West Texas farmers, ranchers, residents, and environmentalists who worry he will steal water from their cattle, dry up their crops, and deplete the spring that feeds the famous pool at Balmaria State Park. The Houston Chronicle reports, with water in short supply and high demand, Hughes, one of the largest landowners in the United States and president of his father's oil company, plans to tap an aquifer under his 140,000-acre Apache Ranch. Which brings us to our story of the week: water. Can we afford to live without it? Here's Dr. David Canervo, our resident political scientist and historian, to give us the backstory. David?
Thanks, Tom. Early in our history as a nation, citizens tended to take our natural resources, such as water, for granted. As settlers moved west and engaged in activities that polluted rivers and wells, they simply moved on to another location, believing that there was an endless supply of clean water that would be found and used until it was necessary to move again. Now that the entire continent has been settled, we have come to the realization that our resources are not unlimited, and that clean water can become a scarce commodity. As Joan Rose of Michigan State University reports, writing for Time magazine, hundreds of beaches in this country are closed periodically because of water pollution, and illnesses caused by bacteria in water are not uncommon. And these bacteria mutate to become resistant to current treatment methods. It is not just the amount of clean water itself, however, that can be a problem, but a second problem is also the way it is transported. As Flint, Michigan has experienced, our aged infrastructure of lead pipes can introduce that poisonous substance into drinking water and cause damage to otherwise healthy brains. And finally, the cost of water in the United States is also increasing. What happens when we can no longer afford it? Ken?
Thank you, David. Let's begin with this clip from Illustrated Ideas called The World Water Crisis.
Our bodies are as much as 60% water. All living things contain it, and like us, depend upon it for survival. Although 70% of the earth is covered with water, a staggering number of the world's poor lack even the most basic sanitation and access to clean water. 97% of the water on earth is salt water. 2% is frozen in glaciers and ice caps. Only 1% is fresh water. That needs to be enough for everyone. All 7 billion of us. 1 out of every 8 people on Earth searches every day for clean water. 1 in 6 has no access to a toilet. None. Think about that. What would your life be like if that were you?
Well, no bottled water, I guess. And no water running from the tap at home, so no shower. But seriously, no toilet? Not even this?
Every day, women around the world walk mile after mile to collect water for bathing, cooking, cleaning, and for their families to drink. They can only take back home as much as they can carry. Often that water is teeming with bacteria that will make them sick, but they have little choice. To go without even this polluted water would mean dehydration and possible death.
We can only go 3 days without water.
Countless hours spent searching or waiting in line. Lives and days wasted by illness. Time lost that could have been spent in school, at work, planting, building, providing for their loved ones.
Every 20 seconds, a child dies from a water-related illness like diarrhea.
Tom Osborne, I've been to your home in Tennessee, and you have a wonderful source of spring water, but not everybody has that option. Would you like to share your thoughts about this clip we just listened to?
Yes, Ken, thank you. It reminds me very much, of course, that here in the West, as you say, in my particular case, we have a wonderful spring that we pump right up into the house, and we have no threats as they do in other areas of the world. In the West, water interruptions can be threatening, but not necessarily the norm. For children living in war zones, for example, a normal child does not exist. Journeys to school, the safety of home, and even friends and family, they slowly disappear and are replaced with explosions and violence and insecurity. But on top of the relentless violence in countries such as Syria, the most basic means of survival, water, has become a weapon of war. As a result of violence, the flow of water from the two major springs in Damascus, supplying 70% of the city, was interrupted. As a result, an estimated 5.5 million Syrians in Damascus and rural Damascus, which include immensely vulnerable children and their families, were left without access to running water. And in 2016, in East Aleppo, in the Syrian Arab Republic, children are sent out to collect water from UNICEF, a water point in the Shakur neighborhood. The destruction of water resources is not new in Syria. There have been 30 deliberate water cuts in 2016. Aleppo, Damascus, Hama, Raqqa, Dara. Pumps were destroyed and water sources contaminated in clear violation of human rights. For many, the lack of water supply locally means that many children are forced to walk for hours in search of it, which puts them at a real risk of exploitation and violence and even death. Of course, here in Tennessee, we have a flowing spring, but there's also the problem of the water that we pipe into our houses these days. We don't know what the treatment facilities are, whether they're up to par or not. We think of Flint, Michigan, for example. But I can't imagine being without water. But untreated or contaminated water exposes children to this fecal transmitted infections and life-threatening diseases like diarrhea. So we're very grateful for the water we have here, and we have to think about our policies that would allow a country to deprive any civilization of the life that water gives. Ken?
Dr. Canervo, the water crisis and its detrimental effects can be resolved with the provision of basic water and sanitation. And this resolution can be reached with, let's come up with the top 10 water solutions. I'll throw out one or two. Education. We can educate the population to change consumption and lifestyle habits. Innovate and conserve. Water sources such as aquifers and rainwater are prone to evaporation and unpredictability. The invention of new water conservation techniques will counteract this issue. Can you come up with some, David?
Well, I think a couple that come to mind right away are, number one, improved and more energy efficient desalination processes. What we currently do to desalinate seawater to make it drinkable is very expensive and very energy impacting. And so we need to find better ways of doing that. And secondly, we need to do something that the space program does, and that is to find better ways of recycling dirty water so that we can reuse it for drinking and bathing and other uses as well. Ken?
And agriculture and irrigation. Approximately 70% of the world's fresh water is used for agriculture. Improving agriculture and irrigation practices can appropriately distribute clean water for human consumption. Tom Osborne, can you think of one?
Well, I think immediately, of course, of the ranchers and so on who have to get their water from the ground, and so I can't imagine what it's like to try to get water when there is none to be had.
Well, you're basically saying water catchment and harvesting. Areas without clean water rely on water and catchment systems. Infrastructure, poorly managed infrastructure devastates the economy by wasting resources and increasing costs. Water credits, something that the UN would probably want to talk about, and it's called the Water Credit Initiative, utilizing microfinancing to provide affordable loans to those who require additional help in establishing clean water solutions.
You're listening to U.S. World Report with Tom Osborne, Dr. David Canervo, Ken McCaleb, and Mary Saliba, and we'll be back right after these messages, so stay with us. Welcome back to U.S. World Report with Ken McCaleb, Dr. David Canervo, Tom Osborne, and Mary Saliba. Ken?
This excerpt, audio clip, is about the U.S. Western Water Table, presented by Visionary Victory. It's titled The Coming Global Water Crisis.
In the U.S., the world's largest body of fresh water, the Ogallala Aquifer, an underground lake that extends from the Colorado Rockies to South Dakota, going all the way down to the Texas Panhandle, with a range of 50 to 300 feet of depth. This water resource is what has made America's plains the breadbasket of the world. Unfortunately, like an oil well, this won't last forever. The Ogallala used to have an average depth of 240 feet. Today, its average depth is just 80 feet. Recently, a story done in Texas about a town named Happy, who has simply run out of water for its farms. What once was a booming town that relied on the Ogallala Aquifer has now seen its depths of underground water fall between 0 to 50 feet. Many wells are completely dry, and farmers have been forced to hand over their land to the government's Conservation Reserve Program in exchange for grants. The U.S. Department of Agriculture recently stated, "The supply is going to run out and the plains will become uneconomical to farm." 60 years is what the U.S. Department of Agriculture gives it. This is a scary thought when you think about the way we have built cities, towns, and homes around something that is simply unsustainable. Consider the Colorado River as well, a river that used to run into the Pacific, not anymore. By the time the water fills the pools of Vegas and irrigates and provides drinking water throughout the West, not a drop of water makes it into the ocean. While researching the water crisis, FutureMoneyTrends.com came across studies about how in some places in Africa, so much water has been pulled out of the ecosystem in order to bottle it and send it around the world, some towns have become deserts.
David, what in the world is going on with our country's water supply?
Well, it seems to me there are probably a couple of things that can be explanatory for what gentleman talked about in the roll-in. First, it seems to me that climate change would be at least partly to blame for what is going on, that we're not getting the same amount of rain that we used to have in certain parts of the country, certainly out west. That's been true over the last several years, so that the aquifers are not refilling as they should because of the climate change. And secondly, it's a matter of population, that there are more and more people using the same amount of water, so that there simply is not enough to go around and be replenished at the same rate that it used to be. You mentioned lifestyles earlier. If you think about lifestyles, more people with swimming pools, more people with other uses. There are more water parks being built in communities, so that the water is there, but it's a matter of how it's distributed. And it's not distributed in ways that are healthy and friendly for enough people to use it in ways that they need to use it. I think perhaps one solution, and this is perhaps somewhat radical, is to think long term about population control. That was a big factor in developing countries in the 60s, but I'm wondering if population control and zoning and where we build and how we build might not need to be reconsidered for the long term, because we have a finite amount of water, but the more people we have means that water is divided into smaller and smaller portions for each person. Ken?
Broadly speaking, the world faces three separate water-related challenges that have each gotten much worse in recent decades. First, the world's fresh water supply is very unevenly distributed, meaning that cities and farms often have to invest enormous resources in bringing it to where it's needed. Because the world's population is both growing and increasing clustered in cities, it's becoming more and more challenging to find enough water to grow more crops and at the same time fill more wash basins. And this challenge is responsible for the over-exploitation of many major rivers and groundwater aquifers worldwide. Tom Osborne, would you care to weigh in?
Well, of course, in our water supply here in the United States, we are told that our water supply is safe and it's drinkable and it's available to everyone. But of course, that's not the case. The nation's drinking water supply is safe from a terrorist attack, for example. We know that for sure. The threat of contamination of drinking water through terrorist activities is small, they say. Most contaminants would need to be used in a very large quantity, thereby minimizing an actual threat. And treatment processes already in place will deactivate many contaminants, but not all. Following the tragic events of September 11th, drinking water utilities across the nation were alerted about the need to increase security and have augmented surveillance and protection measures. But when we talk about terrorist attacks on our drinking water and water systems, we have to think about what kind of attack are we talking about. The primary threat is contamination by a chemical or biological or radiological agents, damage, destruction, or sabotage of the physical infrastructure, and or disruption to computer systems, which we've already come close to in this country, and we're watching out for the next possible cyber attack. Weapons of mass destruction pose the most danger in aerosol form, direct exposure to pathogens transported in the air. But is the EPA taking the proper steps to protect our water supply? Well, under Presidential Directive PD 63 in May of '98, EPA was designated as the lead agency for the water supply sector. EPA disseminated to America's utilities useful information about the steps they can take to protect their water. One question is, bottled water safer than water from the tap? Not really. Bottled water is not necessarily safer from terrorist attack than your own tap water. I hate to break the news, but in most cases, bottled water comes from a water source just like the water from your tap. The safety of bottled water depends on the safety and emergency response plans in place at the bottling plant. If you're living in Flint, Michigan, I would definitely check that out. Tap water is protected at the drinking water facility through local security measures, advocated and supported by the EPA and the state and local governments. The question is, will basic safety measures help us out? For example, boiling water, is that effective in removing these certain contaminants? When microorganisms like those that indicate fecal contamination are found in drinking water, boiling water kills these organisms that cause disease. And however, boiling water containing certain contaminants such as lead and nitrate will increase the concentration and the potential risk of the water. Ken?
The hydrological cycle is fickle and often delivers either too much water, causing flooding, or too little, resulting in drought. While this pattern of flooding and drought is a perennial struggle for humanity, it has become more frequent and intense because of climate change, which is shifting both the magnitude and the seasonality of precipitation in many parts of the world. You're listening to U.S. World Report with Tom Osborne, Dr. David Canervo, Mary Saliba and Ken McCaleb. We're up against a hard break, but when we come back, we're going to introduce something that might surprise our audience, so stay with us.
Welcome back to U.S. World Report. I'm David Canervo, along with Tom Osborne, Ken McCaleb, and Mary Saliba. And today we're talking about water. Can we afford to have it? Ken?
Thank you, David. Here's an unusual clip from Nestle's CEO, Peter Brabeck.
Hello, I'm Peter Brabeck, the chairman of Nestle. There are apparently some misconceptions about my ideas on water. Let me make it clear from the beginning. I have always supported the human right to water. Everyone should have enough clean, safe water to meet their fundamental daily needs. About 50 to 100 liters per day. But not to fill a pool or wash a car. There is a difference. We must transform the way we think about water. By 2025, 1.8 billion people will be living in regions without enough water. Water scarcity is the greatest challenge we face today. And we need to start recognizing water as a precious resource. Therefore, water should be better managed, should be better valued, and has to be better preserved. If we give water value, there will be an incentive to invest in looking after our supply. You know, most of fresh water we use, up to 90% in fact, is used in agriculture. As a food producer, we depend on the long-term sustainable availability of this precious resource. In our factories, we have reduced our use of water by more than half in the last 10 years. But we are not alone. We work with others to exchange ideas and innovations and to advocate on the importance of water. I'm glad water is top of the agenda today. It's where it should stay. And thanks you for taking the time to be part of this conversation.
Tom Osborne, this clip struck me like asking a cunning fox to guard the hen house. Isn't Nestle Corporation of Switzerland scooping up water rights all across America?
Of course they are, and it's our water. That's the problem. Today there are thousands of bottled water companies worldwide. There's even a Trump Ice, by the way. But Nestle's is the biggest globally in terms of sales, followed by Coca-Cola, Pepsi Company, according to the Euromonitor International. Nestle Waters, in the Paris-based subsidiary, owns almost 50 brands, including Perrier, Pellegrino, and Poland Spring. Last year, U.S. bottled water sales reached $16 billion, up nearly 10% from 2015, according to Beverage Marketing Corporation. Nestle outpaced soda sales for the first time as drinkers continue to seek convenience and healthier options and worry about the safety of the tap water after the Flint, Michigan ordeal. But here's the irony. While the Environmental Protection Agency is attempting to roll back existing regulations, saying bottled water isn't necessarily more pure than tap, in fact, that is exactly what it is. Your tap water is being bottled and sold back to you. Let me read you what is on the side of the bottle, stamped on every one. I purchased this at a dollar store in Pennsylvania. Nestle's Pure Life. Purified water, calcium chloride from a deep protected well, in Brenningsville, Pennsylvania, and or public water supply, Allentown, Pennsylvania, purified using reverse osmosis, and that is simply distillation. So let's break it down. Nestle, a company from Switzerland, is bottling city tap water in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and selling it back to its residents via the dollar store statewide. Does anyone have a problem with this? Just asking. What Nestle did is use a good marketing scheme to make tap water uncool and undangerous. It's ubiquitous, like Kleenex, people will say, give me a bottle of Nestle. And of course, the problems are not just with Nestle. There are many subsidiaries and many various companies that do the same business with less of a reach. Nestle alone sold $7 billion worldwide, with more than 343 million of it coming from Michigan, where the company bottles Ice Mountain natural spring water and Pure Life, its purified water line. The Michigan operation is only one small part of Nestle, the world's largest food beverage company, but it illuminates how Nestle has come by to dominate a controversial industry spring by spring. And I don't think they're going to be coming to Tennessee Ridge because they're not going to get my spring. Ken?
Here's some emails that recently came into our show. This one from Tom Axtell in Quebec, Canada says, "It's an opportunity to educate everyone about the value of drinking our tap water in reusable bottles, which in most cases is perfectly good. Now, if teachers could quantify the value to improving the environment, especially oceans, by saying no to bottled water, kids would be on the front line of reversing this dumb trend." And Linda Finken of Allentown, Pennsylvania, says Nestle is the worst tasting bottled water no matter where they get their water. Primarily, it's distilled water, the same one might pour into their irons to press their shirts, skirts, and pants. You're listening to U.S. World Report. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to U.S. World Report. I'm Tom Osborne, and today we're discussing water. Can we afford to live without it? And what about those costs? Did I tell you, there was one fact I forgot to mention about Nestle. They pay for this water, making those billions of dollars, by extraction fees. In Michigan, it's $200. Ken?
Wow. You know, some residents of Flint, Michigan weren't happy when they found out last month that Nestle was going to pump more water out of a nearby spring and pay close to nothing, probably less than the $200, especially given that just a few days later the state ended the city's free water distribution program. Well, maybe they'll be a little more warm to the water company now, because Flint Mayor Karen Weaver announced Thursday that Nestle would begin donating water bottles to the city, which has been dealing with a water crisis for more than 4 years now. You see, the government agencies completely failed the predominantly black city when it switched its water source back in 2014, and ever since Flint has been on a mission to rid of its water of lead, which leached from the pipes and from fracking by completely replacing its water system. In the meantime, residents are hesitant to use any water from their faucets, even if the state deems it safe. Many still rely on bottled water, but without the state-run free distribution program, residents who already face high poverty rates would be forced to pull from their own pockets to cover the cost. Now, apparently, Nestle ain't going to let that happen. It's partnering with the city to provide 3 semi-trucks of water totaling 100,000 bottles a week. The trucks will drop off the water at 3 help centers where residents can arrive to pick up their case. The problem is that this is going to end on Labor Day. What do they do after that? All right, now this next clip is from CBS Los Angeles, and apparently President Trump wants to offer fracking leases in the state of California.
The Trump administration is taking steps to open up California to fracking for oil and natural gas. The Bureau of Land Management is considering leases that would allow fracking on nearly 2 million acres of California land. Fracking is when they inject water or chemicals deep into the ground to break apart rock and shale and release the oil that's inside. Some worry that could cause earthquakes.
Exploring ways to produce more oil in California is a good thing in and of itself, because we only produce about 30% of the oil that we use here in California.
We need our groundwater for the highest possible uses. And fracking is not a very high use in the scheme of things. The issue is with the underground injection of the waste fluids, the contamination.
Yeah, this is something. Experts at UCLA, also the U.S. Geological Survey, they say there's no indication that fracking has caused earthquakes in California. Well, not yet. However, there's a report published in the Journal of Science, and they've been studying this in Oklahoma. There have been an uptick of earthquakes in Oklahoma because they've been doing fracking there.
Dr. Canervo, fracking in California, like Michigan, a good idea or a bad idea?
I'm not sure it's a good idea for California, given the number of earthquakes they already have, and the evidence from Oklahoma that, in fact, fracking may lead to more earthquakes. So I think that's a concern, certainly for those who live there, but also the use of the water in that means as well. We have just seen 4 years of drought in California. While the drought apparently has ended due to storms the last year or two, nevertheless, it is an area where water does seem to be in relatively short supply, given the number of people who have moved there in recent years. So it is a real concern, I think, that water is used in that way. And I'm wondering again whether we need to change lifestyles, perhaps, limit the number of swimming pools, limit the number of car washes, limit the number of other uses for water, whether it be in the West or whether it be in other parts of the country as well, so that water is used for the highest purposes, not just for oil exploration, though I must confess that at the same time, the fact that we have more oil and resources from fracking is somewhat helpful, but we need to transition from that oil to safer, more climate-friendly types of energy. Ken?
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I could drink oil. So what I want to ask you, though, is fracking fluids a toxic brew? Now, during the hydraulic fracturing of a well, water is mixed with various chemicals to make a toxic brew called frack fluid. And until recently, neither the federal nor the state governments required drilling companies to disclose the ingredients used in frack fluids. Tom Osborne, you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I think it's going to be a difficult project because there are many, many thousands of ranchers and farmers who are really not happy about the leases that are being given out because they're going to be going into these huge aquifers, and there's going to be taking the water from those farmers and ranchers who their crops and their livestock depend on. So that it's not a good ecosystem all the way around to have this rather profitable adventure going on using hundreds of thousands of gallons of water, but it's liable to drown us with not good news. Ken?
Well, guys, gas companies routinely claim that frack fluid is harmless because the concentration of the chemical additives is low, about 2%, but just 2% of the billions of gallons of frack fluid created by gas drillers measures up to the use of hundreds of tons of toxic chemicals. In 2011, a report to Congress estimated that between 2005 and 2009, 14 leading fracking companies used 780 million gallons of 750 different chemicals to pull the gas out of the ground. Does this sound like an efficient way to get our energy, Dr. Canervo?
No, it isn't terribly efficient, but we have already done the easy things when it comes to drilling for oil and gas in this country. And so we've had to develop these more complex means of reaching and pulling out from the ground these resources. These are resources which currently we need, but we need again to wean ourselves off of them and move to more energy and money and conservation-friendly types of energy. Ken?
Well, in Pennsylvania, Colorado, Ohio, and Wyoming, fracking has been linked to drinking water contamination and property damage. A Duke University study examining 60 sites in New York and Pennsylvania found systematic evidence of methane contamination in household drinking water. In fact, I saw a video where a person held a match under a running faucet and it flamed instead of put out. You're listening to U.S. World Report. We're going to try and sum things up with our editorialist, Ms. Mary Saliba, so stay with us. Welcome back to U.S. World Report, and this is our show's summary segment where we get a chance to hear from our news team editorialist, Ms. Mary Saliba. Mary?
Thanks, Ken. The crisis of water scarcity throughout the world worsens, while on a parallel plane, those who would exploit that need and turn it into a marketing strategy are winning that opportunity throughout the U.S. In basic numbers, there might be enough water in the world for each person, but it's not distributed evenly, and in reality, 1 in 5 people live without enough. India, China, Africa, even here where safe water has seemed a given, we've seen the horrors of contaminated water with the lead poisoning of thousands in Flint, Michigan. But it's big business. At least half of the water bottled in the U.S. is municipal water, but it costs the consumer 2,000 times the price of the self-pouring tap type. In fact, tap water has to meet much more stringent requirements than bottled water. The millions spent on this misleading but successful advertising campaign here has made bottled water a $16 billion business. The former CEO of Nestle, which bottles Poland Spring and other labels here in the U.S., states that the global water crisis makes it essential to monetize water. It's easy to be distracted by facts, such as the 3 children a minute who die from water-related issues. But his urgent call to regulate water relies on the deregulation of water by the government of the United States, which in turn means that this so-marketed humanitarian need to manage water actually means that our natural resources are being bought and sold to the highest bidder by a foreign corporation. The current administration, with its suspension of the Clean Water Rule, its re-examination of fracking regulations and other protections, is a real unregulated gold mine for a company like Nestle. What can you buy for billions of bucks? Lakes and streams and groundwater. What are American citizens doing to protect their source water? We are spending $16 billion on assisting foreign bottlers in depleting our resources. We cannot be assured that our government and compromised EPA will protect our water sources. It is imperative that we individuals stop buying the propaganda, specifically the water bottles. With every dollar we give these bottling giants, we are investing in our own demise. This has been Mary Saliba for U.S. World Report. Ken?
Thanks, Mary. David, would you care to wrap up today's show?
Thank you, Ken. It seems to me with all the problems we have in the world and in this country, one that tends to fly under the radar at least a little bit is water. And I hope that we've illustrated a little bit today that water is a crisis problem for not only the world, but this country specifically. With all of our wealth and riches, we have some serious water problems that government needs to address very seriously and as soon as possible. Ken?
Well, Tom Osborne, you've discovered that the Nestle Corporation has been duping people nationwide, and not only in this nation, but in Pakistan and other countries in Africa. But as always, you have the final say.
Well, thank you, Ken and David. You know, we're all familiar with that old saying, water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. Let's hope those who are seeing this critical threat to our ecosystem hear this alarm and act now to reverse the damage that we are doing. That's all the time we have today, but we hope you'll join us next week. Also, we value your thoughts and opinions and welcome your visit to our website, usworldreport.org, and email us at usworldreport@gmail.com. Join us next week for another edition of U.S. World Report with myself, Tom Osborne, Ken McCaleb, our moderator, Dr. David Canervo, our resident historian and political scientist, and of course, our editorialist, Mary Saliba. See you next week on U.S. World Report. Thanks for listening.